This episode is brought to you by Thorn, and I have some incredible news for any of you that are in the military, first responder, or medical professions. In an effort to give back, Thorn is now offering you an ongoing 25% off each and every one of your purchases of their incredible nutritional solutions. Now, Thorn is the official supplement of CrossFit, the UFC, the Mayo Clinic, the Human Performance Project, and multiple special operations organizations. I myself have used them for several years, and that is why I brought them on as a sponsor. Some of my favorite products they have are their Multivitamin Elite, their Whey Protein, the Super EPA, and then most recently, Cinequil. As a firefighter, a stuntman, and a martial artist, I've had my share of brain trauma and sleep deprivation, and Cinequil is their latest brain health supplement. Now, to qualify for the 35% off, go to thorn.com, thorne.com. Click on sign in and then create a new account. You will see the opportunity to register as a first responder or member of military. When you click on that, it will take you through verification with GovX. You'll simply choose a profession, provide one piece of documentation, and then you are verified for life. From that point onwards, you will continue to receive 35% off through Thorn. Now, for those of you who don't qualify, there is still the 10% off using the code BTS10, Behind the Shield 10, for a one-time purchase. Now, to learn more about Thorn, go to episode 323 of the Behind the Shield podcast with Joel Totoro and Wes Barnett. Welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast. As always, my name is James Gearing, and this week it is my absolute honor to welcome back onto the show former Navy SEAL and the director of the Florida Chamber Health Council, John Doolittle. Now, in this second conversation, we discuss a host of topics, from responding to hurricanes with the Florida State Guard Special Missions Group, the mental health crisis, firefighter work week, the free access first responders in Florida and other states have to eTMS, the EEG guided transcranial magnetic stimulation, and so much more. Now, before we get to this incredible conversation, as I say every week, please just take a moment. Go to whichever app you listen to this on, subscribe to the show, leave feedback, and leave a rating. Every single 5-star rating truly does elevate this podcast, therefore making it easier for others to find. And this is a free library of well over 1,100 episodes now. So all I ask in return is that you help share these incredible men and women's stories so I can get them to every single person on planet Earth who needs to hear them. So with that being said, I welcome back onto the show John Doolittle. Enjoy. Well, John, I want to start by saying this time, welcome to my home and welcome to the Behind the Shield podcast for the second time.
Yeah, James, thanks, man. It's so good to be here, and thank you for opening your home, letting me hang out with Ember, the not golden retriever, the German Shepherd sleeping over in the corner now. And yeah, I love it. Love your home, and it's good to finally meet you in person.
Yeah,
you know, it's
long time
we've been talking
coming.
about it for over 3 years, I think.
Now, you're based in the Tampa area. I think a good icebreaker would be between the last time we spoke and now, there have been several hurricanes that have hit your area. We've been very lucky, I'm touching wood now. In my area, we really didn't have a huge amount, but the West Coast got battered. So talk to me about the role you held in the Florida State Guard, and then let's talk about those responses as a kind of opener.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's about a year and a half ago, I went to an assessment and selection for the Florida State Guard. They have a group called the Special Mission Unit that is primarily made up of former special operations guys. There's I think we're at about 55 people now. And so you have the FSG, the regular Florida State Guard, and then you have the Special Missions side. And Yeah, I don't know. When I was growing up, my dad was a ski patrol. He did a bunch of stuff. He was a retired Air Force guy, worked for a phone company, and he was a volunteer ski patrol. I did that for over 30 years in Lake Tahoe. And if you ask him today, what of all the quote, profession that, type things he did, what is he most proud of? And he'll tell you without batting an eye what he did in the ski patrol, just helping people. And, that was something I wanted in my life. So I went to the selection process, went through that whole thing, and I'm on the team. And yeah, we had 8-9 months ago, we had Hurricane Helene, highest storm surge in over 100 years in this part of Florida. And then right on the tail end of Helene, we had Hurricane Milton. And so yeah, being part of the state guard for that's been good. We have an emergency response capability, but we also have the ability to do just about whatever the governor needs us to do to support the state. But I'd say the majority of what we do is kind of emergency response.
Why is it that those roles are filled with the special operations community, and what is it that you guys bring specifically to that role?
Well, I think what's unique about the SOCOM community is Special Operations Command community is with a small group of guys, you can really get a lot of good stuff done. And when you take people who lived and worked in that world for a career, and now they're doing other things on the outside, because it's essentially a volunteer. The FSGs, there's a little stipend, a little bit of pay, but it's basically a volunteer gig. And when you're tied in with other guys that worked in small teams overseas, doing a bunch of different stuff, there's really nothing that you can't get done. And it's just a natural fallout from being a team guy and rolling into being a different kind of team guy. I think I'm the most junior guy on the force.
Oh, really?
Frock Master Sergeant, yeah.
It's interesting, though, because that parallels what I've heard so often in the transition stories is, especially in police and fire, I don't know why this is the case, but a lot of my profession, they're like, well, all I know is fire, so I'll go and teach at a fire academy. Or the cops will go and become security somewhere. Mm-hmm. But that's not all we are. We've worked in high-stress situations. We work well in teams. We're problem solvers, So see, what you're talking about, obviously you're not hunting bin Laden or whatever else was going on in the Middle East, but now you're taking that same skill set and applying it in a different way. And I think that's such an important takeaway for transition, is it doesn't have to be apples to apples. It's a broader scope. But where I see a lot of healing and a lot of value is when people find a way to still use that same skill set in a way to make the world a little bit better. And it sounds like exactly what you guys are doing.
Yeah, when a hurricane hits, man, people need all kinds of help. And, we were talking about Sebastian Junger's book over lunch, Tribe. And I think when you serve, whether we're talking first responders or we're talking military or whatever, you're with a lot of like-minded type guys. Usually have the same kind of worldview, and it's kind of a brotherhood. Your group, your tribe, right? And when you leave that, it's very hard to find that on the outside. This is just one more way to do that,
So with those hurricanes specifically, what were stories of heroism that you heard? And then what were the kind of lesson learned takeaways of, maybe being better prepared, or the residents being better prepared in the future?
Well, I think law enforcement, firefighters, the sheriff's department, all the existing first responders across that part of the state. The stories of heroism. When you have a massive surge like that, and you have a lot of people breaking out through their roofs or stuck on their second or third story homes, and and you have these law enforcement officers and firefighters and the state guard guys running around in boats and large vehicles and just helping people. And they might not be stories of heroism, but they're just stories of helping people, helping the community, helping the county, the city, the districts and stuff. I think anyway, you'll have to edit that part.
No. Not at all.
I forgot what the second question was.
No, but the problem is I threw two questions at you simultaneously, which I shouldn't do. So the other part was takeaways. Are there any lessons learned as far as preparation? Because it's not blaming at all, but obviously after an incident, there's always value in, okay, if we could do this again, what would we do differently?
Well, I think one of the takeaways for me personally was all these homes that were built in our state before 1970, before when you look at these homes that have built in the 50s and 60s and they're on a concrete slab, mm-hmm. and they're above the high water mark, but they're not necessarily above the 100-year flood mark, so they're inside a flood zone. I never really thought of that as being a major issue when we were looking for places to live in Florida. But having responded to these people and worked in those houses now where, and it's not just salt water that comes in, you have sewage overflow and all the drama that comes with that. And you walk into a place after the surge has gone down and the water's 4, 5, 6 feet up the drywall, the entire home is ruined. And so I will never buy another house in Florida that's not up to code. Up to code meaning, especially for the elevation piece, because you run from the flood and you hide from the wind, right? So mm-hmm. The storm surge is like major drama, man. It's all these homes in Shore Acres that half the homes in Shore Acres still haven't been rebuilt, and it's 9 months after Helene. So that was one takeaway. Another takeaway that I saw in my local community, and anybody you talk to that lives in Clearwater, St. Pete, all the way down to Sarasota where the eye hit after Milton, you had fallen trees everywhere. And we've been through a bunch of hurricanes. I never seen so many trees down as Milton. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the one where the roof got torn off, the Trop in downtown St. Pete and all that. But seeing all the neighbors come out, and I saw this right where I live. I mean, 3 of the neighbors I've never even spoken with. And after Milton, I know them all. We're all tight now because we're sharing chainsaws and we're going around the neighborhood helping each other out. That was really cool to see. It's unfortunate sometimes it takes a disaster to see the best in people, but that absolutely took place during that back-to-back hurricane.
I literally had a conversation with someone the other day, and we were talking about that very thing. That there's always that comment like, we seem to come together after a 9/11. And
yeah,
do we have to wait for a 9/11? So with this kind of unique lens that you have through your military career and some of the altruistic things you're doing outside, if you were king for a day, how do we bring back that community so we're not waiting for a worst case scenario to actually get neighborhoods back together again?
If I were king for a day, I would mandate that every 18, 19, 20-year-old kid would have to do a year of service. And it could be community service, city level, district, county level, state level, federal level. To me, it wouldn't matter, but you'd have to do some kind of service, because I firmly believe, and this is after spending a fair amount of time in Israel, but you don't become an adult in Israel without having served your at least community, but you don't necessarily have to get in the military, but service in some capacity, I think, is really important, and I don't think we have enough of that. And I would consider being in the first responder world. I would consider being in the military, houses for Habitat for Humanity, all that kind of stuff. If we mandated that, I think the our nation would be in a much different place.
It's interesting. Sebastian Junger said the same thing. One of the interviews I remember clearly. He was like, the problem is with military service is not everyone is supposed to be a military member. And I agree with him. I think that's right. If you, whether you kind of disagree with the principle or whether maybe you're just not cut from that cloth, your ability to plant trees for a year or be an adjunct teacher or, whatever it is. I think understanding that this is a shared experience as a nation, I think it's so powerful. And I think there is a disconnect. And at least from where I'm sitting, this last at least 20 years, that message of I'm the most important person in the world has been reinforced, whether it's in the business world, whether it's in the sporting world. We were talking before we hit record about our youth sports. If your child doesn't win the national championships, then, they're worthless.
A failure.
Yeah. So I think that would be invaluable to make people realize that it's we. Like I always said, there's no I in USA, but there is an us.
I like that. Yeah, I think it would really improve things. When you're all in it for yourself and you don't see the bigger picture, you miss out on a lot. We're all missing out from a lot of the stuff that our parents and our grandparents grew up with. And now with all the smart devices and all this kind of stuff, the kids are missing on a lot of that.
Absolutely. Well, you were talking, I've forgotten the name of it now, but the program trying to address childhood obesity. So let's talk about that for a moment and the success that they've seen in the areas that they're working.
Yeah, a little while ago, I was exposed to this program in the Panhandle in Florida called the Champions Program, and they've done some really cool stuff. They've been around for like 20 years, and there's people that have been through the program as parents whose kids are now going through the program. And I don't know a whole lot about it, but what I've learned is that they basically go into the public school system and they augment the PE classes, the physical education classes. And it's like less emphasis on sports and how to play a sport and the rules associated with the sport, and more emphasis on moving and exercise and healthy lifestyle. And when you're doing aerobic activity, understanding what that's doing for your brain, and much more of a focus on that. And as a result, the data that's come out of the 6 counties that it's been in for a while now is phenomenal compared to the rest of the state and the rest of the nation. Something like that being expanded and scaled across America would be pretty incredible. But yeah, Champions program out of the Panhandle in Florida, pretty amazing.
I had a guy on the show a while ago now, Doug Orchard, who made a documentary called The Motivation Factor. And it was a school in, I think it was Central California. And the coach had basically kind of studied a Russian model and brought it over to his high school, La Sierra High School. And it was a kind of a version of the belt system in martial arts, but it was shorts, different colored shorts.
Okay.
And the kids worked as a group. And I'm sure they did an initial testing to put, kind of similar ability kids together. But they worked as a team, and you're doing PT every single day. And the goal is, when you get to a benchmark, you test for that benchmark, and then you get a different color pair of shorts.
Love it.
And the video footage of these kids, I'm assuming they were probably the top tier kids. Any one of them could have been a Men's Health cover model.
Really?
And the whole philosophy was, firstly, the grades improved. The bullying basically went away. And even in the sports, whatever sport these kids wanted to do, they were already conditioned. So all they had to worry about was the skill training. They didn't have to do conditioning because these kids were already fit and strong. And like the top tier one, there was a partner carry, and I think it was something crazy like 3 miles. It was 7 times up and down a pegboard. They had all the parallel bars that, meters and meters of them. And it was all calisthenics. It wasn't even using weights. But, it was militant in a positive way, like a communal way. But yeah, so these kids are all cheering
Seeing
each other on.
YouTube videos of
That was
that.
it.
The Russian approach. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then you compare that to exactly what the ethos was you were just talking about. What we have in schools now, if there's even any, you have the PE program, if it's even there, but then the sports, it's the opposite. It's the, if you're not first, you're last, participation trophies and all this kind of conversation.
So less emphasis on that piece.
On moving. Yeah. Simply moving as a group, because no one's winning that. You're elevating as a group. But if everyone's that top tier shorts, then brilliant. But the point with that is, even if you're the clarinet player that otherwise has no interest in sport, you're still going to be one of the fittest kids in the country compared to the other system.
Well, the thing that is really cool about this program is you're measured and graded on effort. So if you're that clarinet player and your heart rate gets up to 175, 180 on whatever it is that you're doing, yet you come in near last, you're still going to get an A, because it's all about the effort.
Yeah, exactly.
You may be the worst runner in the class, but they're measuring all kinds of outcome measures, and it's not just the speed that they run, but how hard are you working, which equates to how hard are you trying. And when a kid tries really hard and they don't do well and they get a bad grade, you've just de-incentivized that kid to do anything with sports and athletics or just functional movement and taking care of themselves ever again.
100%.
And when that happens over and over and over, I mean, we're building it into those kids. Whereas in this program, that clarinet player just got an A+ because her heart rate was at 185 for 15 minutes. Boom, she's on cloud 9. And she's going to embrace that type of approach to her lifestyle. She's going to embrace it going forward. And I firmly believe that physical resilience drives emotional resilience. And when you look at what's going on with our kids in the state of Florida, 40% of the kids have mental health issues. And the majority of that 40% are unmet needs. So, I had one of the people that runs NAMI Florida, National Alliance for Mental Illness here in Florida. And she said, there's not enough behavioral health providers in all of America to meet the needs, behavioral health needs, just in the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
There's not enough nationwide to deal with what we're dealing with for behavioral health here in the state of Florida. So if that's the case, something has to change.
Yeah.
We got to do some stuff differently. And I think what this program is doing may be a way to do that, because I don't think it would be that hard to fold in some behavioral health, mental wellness, self-confidence type stuff. I mean, all that stuff's going to improve when you start doing these things with these kids. And you got me on a little bit of a soapbox, because when I was at SOCOM, my last job there, we were dealing with a lot of behavioral health challenges for the families, the dependents, the members, the military members. And it is frustrating because there's only so much you can do once they are an adult and they're set in their ways. But if you can get to them when they're kids, before they completely set themselves up for a life of misery, if you can get to them early, you can really make an impact. And so, I think that's a direction we should try and go.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting statistic. I'm going to remember that. So if there is a greater need in the state of Florida for counselors than we can provide in the entire 50 states, that does, highlight that there are groups within that state that absolutely need mental health counseling specifically. But then there's these kind of, larger circles where I think other holistic things will make a huge dent in that. And maybe that child doesn't need mental health professionals specifically. And it's the same as we were talking and most people are not going to be surprised that I start talking about 24/72, but in the fire service,
you better go there, because if you don't, I am.
The focus is, well, we need counselors and peer support and all this stuff, and it's like, well, yeah, but sleep is the first pillar.
Yep.
If you are not sleeping, you can't counsel or EMDR your way out of it. That's not the case. So going back to these children, now you put in PE. Now you serve real food in schools, and you remove the soda machines and stop the Cisco trucks from showing up anymore. And then now these kids have got more energy. They're burning off calories. They're having that sense of community. They're enjoying sports because they're not told they have to win or they're a piece of shit. How many of that demand in the state of Florida now goes down? And now you start getting a smaller number than maybe the Southeast would be enough to cover the kids in Florida. And then you start addressing the issues with social media. So I think it's an interesting conversation, and people keep talking about that. Oh, we need more counselors, and we do. But you're also missing the point. People are, and we're talking about this, if you're not addressing the exercise, nutrition, the ability to simply put a child on a Headspace app, meditation at home, going out of their house and playing without taking a cell phone with them, all these things, there's no question in my mind that a large percentage of those kids that are struggling on paper will now stop. And Johan Hari has a great quote: the opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's connection.
Oh, yeah.
So, you get these kids off their devices, eating well, sleeping well, and forging friendships in and outside of school. How much of that massive mental health 40% is going to shrink down to a manageable amount of those children that still then need actual counseling? Yeah,
the social connectedness, that's the most important thing that we're collectively after. That Harvard study was like 80 years, longest study in all of academia in America. And the number one thing for longevity, et cetera, was social connectedness. The value of deep relationships. And building that in our kids early on, which is the exact opposite of what's happening with social media and smartphones, all this crap.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, staying on the health model, the last time we spoke, you were working for Kaatsu.
Yeah.
So talk to me about that product. One of my friends, Jesse Salas, who's one of the
I know Jesse.
right-hand man of the foundation training world, he's been using that, in so many really interesting ways. So talk to me about that, and then kind of what made you transition into the role that you're doing now.
Jesse's brought into mixed martial arts. He's brought into UFC, big wave surfing. That guy is all over the place. Mm-hmm. He and Chris Morgan, who's the chief performance officer there. But I was with Kaatsu for 8 years. Absolutely loved the product, loved the company. I use it every single day. They are doing a lot of phenomenal work for wounded warriors, for TBI. It's not just an orthopedic rehab device. And for listeners that have no idea what we're talking about, they're think of them as therapeutic air bands, elastic air bands that you wear high on your arms or high on your legs, and the computer will pressurize with air pressure for 30 seconds and then release it for 5. And then the next pressure will be a little bit more, like 10 millimeters mercury higher in pressure. And it does that repeatedly, automatically in the background while you do some functional movement. And great for orthopedic rehab, or great for guys like you and me. I'm getting ready to turn 56. I'm all beat up. I've had 13 orthopedic surgeries. I can't go heavy anymore, but it's a way to get good metabolic outcomes with doing little to no weight during functional movement. Mm-hmm. So love it. Did it for 8 years. I am very appreciative of all the time I had with Kaatsu. The things they have coming are really exciting. But I did a public speaking gig out in the Disney World for the Florida Chamber of Commerce 2 years ago, like a year and a half ago. And one of the things I talked about during that leadership conference, it was right after Michael Phelps spoke. He spoke the day before. And he talked about his mental health journey. First of all, I had no idea that Michael Phelps had this big of a challenge. He had 3 major suicide ideations. Like, he really had thought through and planned for killing himself. And thankfully, he sought treatment on his own with some help with some close friends. And anyway, he told that story. And his life goal now is his foundation, the Michael Phelps Foundation, help people with behavioral health and mental wellness and mental health and all that. But it was a phenomenal talk. And so after hearing him speak, I tweaked my talk because I wanted to be sure and share the story of a good friend of mine that I went to the Air Force Academy with. And I honestly can't remember if we talked about this last time we were on. I'll tell it again just in case.
Please.
And we both graduated from the Air Force Academy. We both did an inter-service transfer into the Navy. We both went into the SEAL teams. We were both at SEAL Team 2. We both became commanding officers. I was doing my second CO tour in Germany, and he was the commanding officer of SEAL Team 4 down in Afghanistan. And we would talk just like this, face to face, but over a video thing once a week, because I had guys working for him. He had guys working for me. We would swap guys out, get guys combat experience and all that kind of stuff. And one day they had a tragedy and lost one of their guys. So the next week we missed our call for obvious reasons. And then the next time I saw him, he didn't look good. And, I asked him, you sleeping? You taking care of yourself? Not really. He was kind of blaming himself for a lot of what happened. And then a few weeks later, they had another tragedy and lost 2 more guys. And the next time I looked at Job, he just looked like complete, he did not look good. And then I'll never forget Saturday morning, I'm bringing December 22nd, 2012, I'm bringing Sean, our oldest, to a birthday party in Germany. And I get a phone call and I see the area code 757's Virginia Beach. So it's Saturday morning, middle of the night in Virginia. It's not good. I pick up the phone. It's a friend of mine. And I could just tell right away, John, I got some really bad news. And I said, who was it? And he said it was Job Price. And I remember thinking, okay, SEAL, Afghanistan, combat operations, it's dangerous. We've all been to a lot of memorial ceremonies, but it was the next thing the guy said, my buddy, that took the wind out of my sails. He said, hey, what you need to know, John, is that it appears that Job died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. It appears to be suicide. And I just remember being like, holy crap, how can this be? This guy's a commanding officer, pinnacle of his career as an officer in the teams, leading troops in combat. We all thought a very, very resilient guy. It was his 14th deployment. But it hit me like a ton of rocks that night when I was talking to Katie about it. It was that realization that no matter how tough you are, no matter how resilient you are, no matter how tough you think your buddy, everybody's got a breaking point, 100%. And Job is the perfect example of that, the permanent decision to a temporary problem. Everybody's got a breaking point. And it totally changed kind of my worldview on a lot of things from that point on. That was in 2012. Jump forward to 2014. Admiral McRaven asked me, he knew I was very tight with Job. He asked if I would take on the Preservation of the Force and Family, the POTF program at SOCOM, to help eliminate that from happening again. And I said, yeah. So anyway, full circle, we'll come back to POTF, but I changed my talk to insert that piece with Job after hearing Michael Phelps. And a few months after that, the chamber reached out to me and said, hey, we have a health council. This is the Florida Chamber of Commerce in Tallahassee, so in the state capital. And he said, hey, would you consider interviewing for the job of, director of the health council? And I'm like, well, I have zero experience as a provider. I'm not a provider. I'm not, whatever. And they said, that's okay. We still want to hear how you would approach the problem of a lot of things in Florida, but primarily the behavioral health crisis. Take kids that we were just talking about as an example. We just want to hear how you would approach it. And I loved Kaatsu, man. I was all in on that for a long time. And I went home and I talked with Katie and I said, hey, I feel like I'm doing a lot of good at Kaatsu, but I feel like I could do even more good with this. And she said, well, there's your answer. Mm-hmm. So went to Tallahassee, interviewed, talked for a long time. I know there's a lot of rules in the HR world, in the private sector, that just because we did something in the military and it was very effective, it doesn't necessarily mean you can do it in the private sector, right? But that was what the conversation was about. I told them everything that we did and how beneficial it was to the force and the families. And long story longer, here I am. I work at Florida Chamber. I'm the director for the Health Council, and we're doing some good stuff, man.
Going back to Michael Phelps, it's interesting that you had that experience in person, because I think maybe 3 years ago now, maybe a little bit longer, there was a documentary called The Weight of Gold, and it was so good. And I want to still get some of the athletes from there, including Michael Phelps one day. I think that would be a great conversation, but it was the same exact issue amongst these professional athletes, especially these Olympians, as you and I have in our professions. The loss of tribe, loss of purpose, loss of identity, because some of these kids were literally groomed, like we were talking before we hit record.
Ooh, groomed, bad word.
Yeah, these days it is.
Yeah.
If you have children, you just allow them to play. The Michael Phelpses will rise regardless. You're going to realize that kid needs to be, on a program of, exceptionalism in that particular sport.
Yeah.
But so you take that child now, and that's all they've known in the pool, 5, 6, 7 days a week. And, they win and they win and they win. And one day that's the last time they're going to stand on a podium. And then they're like, well, then who the hell am I? And you heard it from all these different, Lolo Jones and all these other people that were on there. And it was tragic because I think one of them was a wrestler, if I'm remembering rightly. And during the duration of filming the documentary, he went from talking about his mental health struggles to they said that he took his own life.
Oh, man.
So, we were seeing this mirror. So it's amazing how, again, we're human beings in the uniform, and then our early struggles are a big part. And we were talking when we were having lunch. What I've realized over and over and over again in these stories from our population is that when our men and women went to get help, whether it was a great psychologist, whether it was ayahuasca, whatever it was, more often than not, it wasn't Fallujah or 9/11 or, that the Vegas shooting. Mm-hmm. It was when I was 4 years old, when I was 6 years old, and that was never addressed. And so
repressing all
exactly
that
now
stuff.
Working through that, I truly believe that's the hope of post-traumatic growth. That becomes an asset, that becomes a strength. You can't turn back time, but you can work through it and now be stronger, be more resilient, be more compassionate. But if it's buried, if it's crammed down there, that usually is the over and over again the common denominator, especially with the person that was there. Like the suicide attempt was imminent, or even some of the guests, they went through with it, they just survived, versus the people that seemed to do okay in their career, still had highs and lows, but there was an element of that early life either not being super traumatic, or they just found ways of working through it, myself included, by pure chance, so that when they entered the profession, they weren't on a fractured foundation already. So you look at whether it's, the childhoods that some of these elite athletes have and there's loss of identity in that space, or war fighters and firefighters, that's what drove us to want to be a protector. But if left unaddressed, someone who survived 14 deployments ends up dying by their own hand.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of it comes back to recovery time, right?
Yep.
In the military, after 9/11, our recovery time was significantly decreased. And it wasn't like this for everybody, but for a lot of people, basically, at least in special operations, a lot of people went from a 24-month cycle, 18 months of training, leave, workup training, all that kind of stuff, professional development, and then a 6-month deployment that was usually, a joint combined training type thing, running around, having fun, doing good stuff. Then 9/11 happens, and again, I gotta be clear, it was not for everybody, but I'll use our Special Forces brothers as an example. The Green Berets, 5th Group specifically, they absolutely went from an 18-month, a 24-month total to a 6 and 6. So home for 6 months, deployed, kinetic deployment for 6 months. But the 6 months they're home, they're not really home. They're not doing leave. They're not doing professional development. They're doing the bare essential training they need to do to get back out the door and do A, B, or C in a kinetic environment, which means during those 6 months, they're gone for a lot of that time because you can't do a lot of that training back at home station. You got to travel. And that was happening kind of across special operations. And, as you can imagine, the wheels started coming off the proverbial bus pretty quickly. Check fire.
No.
No, I'm saying check fire because I forgot what the hell we were talking about right when we went into the SF stuff. Well, when I went into the SF stuff.
Yeah, so I was talking about the prevalence of our childhood, on our mental health later, but then you were talking about recovery.
And recovery time.
Yeah.
And then I folded into okay.
No, but that makes sense because you talked about the compression of that time. And it's the same with my profession. What should have been...
That was going to be my way to fold into the 24/72, you bastard.
Well, you just did. It worked. But there is a parallel, whether you're military at war or whether you're, a mismanaged fire service. And I say that because, we are in the middle of a woeful recruitment crisis because of poor decisions in the past. So, but,
let's talk about that.
Yeah. So
let's talk about that for a second. Because part of this chamber job, it's kind of like 3 buckets. There's the workforce, of course, private sector. There's the youth, and we can come back to that. But there's veterans and first responders. And what you're doing in the fire service space, or what you have done with a lot of other people that have really worked hard on this, is you have started to convince that community how important the recovery piece is. And a 24/72, so one full 24 hours on and a full 72 quote unquote off, that is still, for a firefighter, 42 hours of work per week. That's still more than a full-time W-2 5-day-a-week job. And when you and I first met, and I realized when fire stations were on a 24 and 48, that was a 56-hour work week. And that's not even taking into account the overtime that, especially if you're a new guy, you're almost like expected to accept. The expectation that if you're directed to do some overtime, that you'll take it on, especially if you're a new guy. Well, now you're not talking about 56 hours. You're talking about 65, 70, 80-hour weeks. Mm-hmm. And these guys are being exposed to trauma all the time and all the emotional triggers that come with that. And we expect them to be driving around these giant red trucks through our neighborhoods at a high rate of speed with little to no sleep. It's just, I'm really happy to hear that there's counties around our state and not even outside the state now that are adopting the 2472 model. Is that a true statement that it is getting adopted?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean,
how many counties would you say so far?
So as far as counties, it's 2, Pasco and now Palm Beach, which I believe is our biggest county, if I'm not mistaken.
Palm Beach, okay.
And then numerous cities. I think we're up to 11 or 12. Kissimmee was another one that just went a few weeks ago. And then, like I said, even I keep getting messages from other parts of the country that are almost there now. So, and then Governor DeSantis just signed in a bill that was initiated by Danny Alvarez that was a wellness initiative, and there's some other things on there, and we're going to get to one of them, obviously, the TMS. But one of them was initially he wanted I think mandate, but then it became a recommendation for a 42-hour work week for the fire service. Was interesting, and I'll never stop saying this because it needs to be pulled out into the spotlight. The Florida Firefighter Chiefs Association put out an email amongst their members saying that they opposed the 42-hour work week.
Why do you think?
Well, here's the issue. I mean, firstly, these are people that work 40 hours a week, saying that they don't think their firefighters deserve to work less than 56. So, take a step back and just think about that statement for a moment as a leader. Secondly, honestly, and it's not, they're not representing every chief in Florida. There are some great chiefs in Florida, but sadly, these are the people that they elected, and they're speaking for them, and that was their stance. But what I'm seeing, and I won't go the massive monologue on this because people listen to this podcast know, the things, but what's crazy is if you look financially at the way that fire service is at the moment, we're woefully understaffed. So a lot of our firefighters are working overtime to fill in these vacancies, as you alluded to, which is time and a half, which is also breaking our people. So now you've got increased sick days to, workman's comp injuries and all the things. And then we've got a lack of retention. So you've got these departments that are spending tens of thousands of dollars to train and equip these recruits who then, year, 2, 3 years later walk out the back door, and you've got people that would have stayed 25 years that are now leaving a lot sooner. So when you look at it, there is no downside. You're going to improve the workforce, you're going to improve their families and relationships and health, the mental health, the physical health, but also fiscally, you're going to save these cities and counties money. So the question is, well, then why is there so much resistance? And the reality is because it takes courage. And I say this from every rank. The firefighters that push back and beat their chest saying, I'll sleep when I'm dead, basically lack the courage to fight for time with their family and time for their own mental health and physical health and performance. If we're talking about the chiefs and city and county managers, and the board, then it's lacking the courage to say, what we've done doesn't work. Up front, we're going to need a little bit more money to add these extra personnel. But that then in turn is going to save us money hand over fist from here on in. So really it's a courage question. Are you actually willing to do the very thing that you collect a salary for and you have all these stripes on your shoulder? Are you willing to actually finally do what you're paid to do, which is advocate for the health of your people and, maximize our ability to respond to the community that you serve?
So what that all makes me think of is there's a reason in the SEAL teams we were at a 3-in-1 for a long time. 3-in-1 meaning the 1 is a deployment for 6 months, and the 3 is the 18 months that you're home, rest, recovery, refit, leave, professional development, unilateral training, joint training. All that stuff takes time, but the recovery piece takes time. You got to have the recovery time. And for what it's worth, for decision makers out there, especially those that work in the fire service, if you're on a 56-hour work week and you're doing a 24-hour cycle of work where you're exposed to trauma, and then you come back from that and you're expecting that same person to come back 48 hours later, it's a recipe for disaster. Because, when we would go on these combat deployments, and I've been out for a while now, but I've been out, for 8 years. But but we'd go on these deployments and we'd get exposed to trauma, of course. And with trauma, as you well know, we've talked about before, there's emotional triggers associated with the trauma. And we would come back and we leave those triggers for the most part overseas. I know we've had this conversation before. But for a law enforcement officer, for a firefighter, for an EMT, for somebody that's exposed to trauma at the 7-Eleven around the corner from where they live, and a cop, a firefighter, somebody has a 6-year-old kid die in their arms, every time they go by that emotional trigger, there's going to be cognitive and behavioral health fallout from that trigger. And guys got to have time, and if you're not having the time in weeks and months, you got to at least give them 2 full solid sleep cycles to get into stage 3, stage 4 sleep. We can talk about the sleep with the TMS stuff, but if you're not giving them that, it's just a matter of time before you have another Joe Price situation on your hands. It's almost criminal in my opinion.
Well, what's sad is, I mean, every day on social media, you'll see Florian crests with a black shroud. And,
Right.
you know, a lot of times they will say died suddenly. And we all know what that means.
Mm-hmm.
You know, died, you know, not line of duty or whatever, however they phrase it. And sometimes it's this bizarre physical issue. You know, the guy we just had, I think he was 25, young firefighter, became septic and just died. I forget which department it was, but one of the U.S. departments. But then you have so many that it's, you know, suicide or, God forbid, an overdose. You probably won't hear about that either. But,
Yeah.
you know, our profession is riddled with them. And again, these are young men and women that trained in an academy how not to die in a fire, you know, that do SAVE training where we work alongside PD and trying to, you know, rescue people in a mass casualty situation, a shooting, and try not to die there too. And then again, the combat veteran, the firefighter, the cop, then they go die by their own hand. So when you're not addressing sleep deprivation, and as I've pointed out many times on here, bearing in mind we use sleep deprivation for interrogation, for special forces selection,
Yeah.
for torture.
Yeah.
You know, you've
had Doc Parsley on here, right?
Yes.
Kirk Parsley.
Yeah, exactly, numerous times. So,
He's
you know, we
amazing.
know the negative side, chronic and acute, you know, and again, you were talking about driving that $1 million engine through. Well, imagine the mental acuity of that person if they're on the second of those, you know, 2 24-hour shifts because they got forced, or even worse, their department thought 48 hours would be a better schedule, which is happening all over the country. And now they're driving past you and your family in your SUV or your minivan, and that person's seeing cross-eyed and they blast through an intersection. Now all of a sudden you guys are on the news. You know, these are real things. So the science shows, you know, that a 24-hour, 72 hours is the minimum to try and get as close to baseline as you can. But you start doing a 24-48.
It's another cool conversation on this. Very close friends of our family, their son is in the Marine Corps. And he's gonna, after one enlistment, he's getting out. And he wants to be a firefighter. And he said, the one thing that I'm not sure about is it just seems like a lot of work and little downtime. And I said, where are you getting that information from? He goes, well, you know, it's a 24-48. And I said, oh, it's actually not 24-48 everywhere. I think you're talking about a recruiting tool. I think you're talking about a retention tool, especially retention. How much does it cost to get a guy through firefighting academy and everything? Is that in the hundreds of thousands of dollars?
No, not so much that, but the locally here, because I sat down did a thing with the IHMC, so it was like a blue sky project, and the local agency was there, and they said at that time it cost them $18,000 per recruit.
Okay.
So, you know, you have, so that you lose 100 recruits, which happens, you know, frequently, you know, you're right there at $2 million. Just walked out the door. You just gave away $2 million of your taxpayers' money. Now you take a larger agency, because Marion isn't a very big county. Now you think about LA, you know, you're probably in the tens of millions of dollars, if not more. And then the overtime.
Because you worked in Anaheim. Right?
Like LA County, LA City, LAFD, their overtime budget for 3 years was $1 billion. That's a B.
Wow.
$1 billion. So you're telling me that you can't hire another shift with
Instead
$1
of
billion.
paying all that overtime.
Yeah, exactly. So this is the thing. Yeah, I mean, and you're absolutely right. The Pasco counties and Gainesvilles, when they announced they were going to this new schedule,
What happened?
Well, Danny Alvarez. No, it wasn't Danny. It was Doug.
Collins?
No, why am I blank on his last name? He's going to kill me now if he hears this. But he was saying that one of his friends works in Pasco and kind of like receiving on the recruitment side. He said, I literally need to have another person hired. Phone is ringing off the hook with firefighters wanting to work for Pasco now. So it's not even like a hypothesis. This is a known thing. Anytime a department has made this shift, they are getting
want to go there.
People coming.
Quality of life is so important. And, I had it backwards in the teams. And we talked about this at lunch too. Mm-hmm. But I always thought it was work first, then family, then self. But we have to allow people in the first responder community to approach it what I feel is the more appropriate way, which is self, family, work. Self meaning, mind, body, spirit, the three-legged stool. Mm-hmm. If you can take care of yourself like that, then you can be more present for your family. And if your family situation is solid because you're solid, now you're all in on work. When you do it the reverse, and I did it reverse for a long time. Thank God Katie's still with me. I'm amazed. But, Katie, we got 3 kids and they're all doing good. We're empty nesters now, man.
Yeah, you said, because I almost was. And then my son, we had some changes and now he's going to community college here. But we were talking over lunch.
Yeah,
I had
that's right. Ty's living here now. That's awesome.
So 2 years from now. But by that point, he'll be 20, so it probably won't sting as much. But
awesome.
Yeah, I was seeing how challenging that was. And that's another part of the mental health conversation. For the kids, when they go away and they're leaving that safe platform that they've had their whole life, but then for the parents, that was our purpose, that was our point of pride, was those children. And now if you're a good parent, you set them off, let them forge their own path, but then you realize, well, shit, who am I now? I was a parent for all this time and I still am, but that was kind of my mission set for 18, 20, 25 years.
Your primary mission. And now when that's gone, we have 3 kids, and I dropped Meg off at school a few weeks ago, starting summer session at Auburn University. War Eagle. But that was tough. That was tough. Very different than dropping the boys off at school. When I dropped Meg off, she has daddy wrapped around her little finger. And then she was like, "Okay, Dad, I'm good. You can go." I'm like, "What? You don't need me?" But for a lot of us, that's our identity for a long time. So yeah,
absolutely. Well, we kind of dropped the TMS thing just briefly in earlier, so we're talking obviously about the importance of rest and recovery and schedules. But Danny Alvarez was on here. I had Dr. Eric Wan on the show.
Oh yeah.
So let's talk about TMS, EEGs, and the states that are helping their first responders and military with these things.
All right. So full disclosure, I am not a TMS expert. Okay. And I also am in no way, shape, or form associated or affiliated with any TMS folks. But I think a good starting point is that TMS, transcranial magnetic stimulation, hasn't been around for a long, long time. And it's FDA approved for treatment-resistant depression. But what this stuff is not traditional TMS. Traditional TMS is a standardized power and a standardized wavelength, 10 hertz. What Dr. Eric Wan and those folks have navigated through is the fact that every brain, like a fingerprint, every brain is uniquely different, and every brain's alpha wave frequency is uniquely different. And what they have done is they figured out a way to look at your EEG, look at your EKG, and determine what your intrinsic alpha wave frequency should be. Now, when you take somebody that's been exposed to trauma, when you take a kid that's dealing with autism, when you take somebody that's been exposed to repetitive subconcussive events, CTE, TBI, blast overexposure, when you take somebody that's been exposed to just about any of that, you can actually see it in the EEG. And you can actually, you see it because the alpha waves are out of sync in parts of the head, in parts of the brain. They have the ability to dial in whatever you're in. I'm a 9.5 guy, and I've been through treatments, right? So they found a place in my brain that was at like 18 hertz. Probably why I was so ADD anyway. So they find this place that's 18 hertz in my brain. They said, okay, we're going to slow this down to what your intrinsic actual wavelength should be. It's done with very, very light magnetic pulse energy. They get all those wavelengths synchronized. I had 2 peaks in my EEG. When you looked at the graph, there were 2 alpha wave peaks, which you absolutely don't want. You want everything to be symmetrical and nice steep curves and a very tall peak. And you want it to all look the same everywhere throughout your head. And I had an area that was too fast. So they slowed it down. And then what happened is my peak, the alpha wave peak, started to coincide over the course of treatment. I went from a 3 to 5 hours of sleep guy to 7 to 8 hours of sleep guy. I got 8 freaking hours of sleep last night. And that's a normal thing for me now. Now, there's a ton of sleep hygiene stuff you can do, and it's all good. I'm not saying anything bad about all that and all the stuff that Kirk partially talks about. This stuff's all awesome. But when you look at the objective measure, you can't fake an EEG. And when you look at the objective measurements of what happens during this treatment, which is non-invasive, it doesn't hurt, there's no drugs, and you see people's sleep actually improve. You actually can see the latency period shift in the stage 3, stage 4 sleep study graphs shift left, meaning they're getting into that recovery level of sleep, which is the most important level of sleep. They're getting into that much faster. And when you're in recovery sleep, Kirk talks about it all the time, that's the only time that your brain shrinks enough to get that, what they call glymphatic, not lymphatic, but the glymphatic flush, to get all the metabolic, all that waste out, all that waste that arguably is where a lot of dementia and Alzheimer's comes from. You shrink the brain during stage 3 and 4 sleep, and that's when all that crap gets flushed out. Well, what happens, at least in the teams, I was living on Ambien for a long time. And what I've learned from guys like Kirk is when you're on Ambien, you never get into recovery sleep. You're tranquilized, you're sleeping, you're getting some rest, but you're never fully recovering. And over time, it's a form of torture, like you were mentioning earlier. So what's happened now is you have states, I believe it's 5 now, Missouri, Ohio, Florida, Virginia, Massachusetts. They've all created legislative grants to get this treatment for first responders, former first responders, military veterans, and I think they're working on getting family members as well, because there's a whole nother conversation we can have with dependence and stress and
vicarious trauma,
all that stuff. Yeah. But they're large grants, and here in Florida, we're treating a lot of guys, and I say we because I see this as a society, community, city, state, district, county, state, national level effort that these guys are doing. And I'm excited to be in the role I'm in the chamber now, because one of those buckets that we're focused on is veterans and first responders. And this treatment is absolutely changing and saving lives. So, when I was at SOCOM, when we were exposed to this stuff for the first time, I've been out for AIDS. Right? So about 11 years ago, I got exposed to this stuff. And it was, coming across as kind of like snake oil, black magic type stuff. But since then, they've done a lot of evidence-based studies, a lot of double-blind placebo type trials, and it works. It works, man. And it's really valuable. So the more guys we can get doing, and Representative Alvarez, he had a good point. He's like, hey, it's a multi-million-dollar grant. And if we use it all in the state of Florida, next year we'll get more. We'll get a bigger grant. And that's happening in 5 states now. I hope it ends up happening in 50 states. And I hope it expands to the family members. I'm passionate about it because I've seen what it did to my life, my marriage, my relationship with my kids. I have a very close friend. I'm not going to mention his name, but he wouldn't mind if I mentioned his name, but I'm not going to say it just because. But he was a former EOD tech, became a SEAL, spent 30 years in the military. Or maybe it wasn't full 30. But anyway, his last job, he was a staff tour at one of our groups in Virginia Beach. And on his way home, so you can imagine this guy's been exposed to a ton of blast overpressurization, a lot of TBIs. And what was happening a couple times a week on his way home, and this is a home he lived in for over 20 years, he was getting lost.
Yeah.
Right? And we're talking a 20-minute drive home over the course of 20 years. And towards the end of this guy's career, he was getting lost on the way home to the point where he had to put a little app, and this was a little while ago, so it wasn't as easy as it is now. But he had to put an app in his phone and, and then follow the map. Oh, yeah, I know where I am now. When he went through this treatment, he flew home for a weekend after the first 2 weeks of treatment. The treatment usually is about 20 sessions. It takes about a month, or you can spread it out longer if you want. But he flew home, and then he went back to finish the treatment. And the headquarters was in California, in Newport Beach. And I got a call from his wife, and she was sobbing. And brother, I thought something horrible had just happened. And she's like, no, John. I have my husband back. There were tears of joy. And it was because he was sleeping better, And yes, it helps with TBI and PTSD and anxiety and all this stuff. But I think when you're talking about the type of people that are first responders, the type of people in law enforcement, type of people that are military, a lot of them don't want to hear that this is a treatment for PTSD. Mm-hmm. They don't want anything to do with anything that's going to label them as a TBI or a concussive issue or any of that stuff, especially in the behavioral health world. And we saw this with the study we did at SOCOM. It was primarily for TBI and PTSD for this methodology. And then after the study was all done, we had guys come and tell us, hey, man, if you had just told us that was a sleep, a way to make our sleep better, which would have improved performance, you would have had 3 times as many people enter the study. Well, they've learned now. So these states that are doing it, it's all about sleep. It's all about, because you can go into the team room and not mention anything about behavioral health or counseling or any of that stuff, right? And just say, hey, man, how many guys, show of hands, got less than 6 hours sleep last night? 3/4 of the hands are going to go up. And it's like, hey, man, this is a way to make that better. And if sleep gets better, performance gets better. And that's an easy conversation to have with people.
Yeah. No, it's funny because that's literally mirrors what I started doing. It's probably been a few years now, but early in this mental health conversation, you had the alphas, and I'm using air quotes because it's not actually a real thing. But, that mental health stuff is just being a pussy and all that kind of thing. And I was like, all right, well then, as I'm learning what are the tools, I'm realizing, well, it's the same exact thing for performance. And I always credit him, there's a baseball player, Logan Gelbrick, who came on the show. And the real aha moment for me is he was talking about a moment where he was in the flow state playing baseball.
Yeah.
And he broke it down because he's a coach as well. And he said, so to get in a flow state, you need to have, thousands of repetitions of that skill. You need to have high stress. Well, again, if you're in the fire service, especially if you've been there for a while, you got those two. Yeah. And you need to have a clear mind. And that was the missing piece. Mm-hmm. So all these guys that were saying, it's just pussy stuff and all that stuff, it's like, okay, so you're actually deliberately not wanting to be a good firefighter? Is that what I'm getting? Mm-hmm. Oh, you do want to be a good firefighter. Okay, well then we need to talk about performance then, in which case, the meditation and the sleep and all these things are going to help you actually perform at the highest level. Because as I mentioned, 100 pounds of gear, climbing 30 stories, and then you go to work. Now you got to map out a smoked out apartment and try and find that child that's hiding under the bed. You honestly think you're going to be able to do that when your mind is like a hurricane? No, you're not. Mm-hmm. So this is the beautiful thing, exactly underlining what you said. Reframing it as a performance tool, which it is. It's not smoke and mirrors.
Right.
The beautiful side effect is you're also positively affecting mental health. And I love, and I'm going to do the TMS when the geography is not an issue, because it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, I've been a firefighter, so there's all that sleep deprivation,
tons of concussive events, lots of trauma.
Exactly, stunt work, martial arts, all the things.
Yeah, that doesn't.
And so I know that's the case, and I do a lot of the sleep hygiene. I took Kirk's word as gospel. I still have his sleep remedy on my fridge there. I do the blue blocking lenses. I have the house at 67, all the things. But I can't control how well I sleep at night. I sleep, but I still have that waking up with my jaw clenching and everything.
Yeah.
And I think there's a part of that there's probably a physiological element too. So, it's a win-win again. If you do CrossFit, you end up with a good physique, but you're not doing CrossFit to get a good physique. You do TMS, you end up with good mental health, but you can make the main focus performance, which is what we need to do in the fire service, because as one of my first t-shirts I ever made for this podcast said, lives depend on you. There's almost no profession that needs a higher level of mental acuity than a firefighter paramedic, because we have such a broad skill set and there is no workup. You're lying in a bunk room, the tones go off. Now you got to drag a kid from a fire and do a cardiac algorithm on the front lawn.
And there's no VA for you guys.
No. We're discarded the moment we walk out the back door. And that sounds dramatic, but it's true. You cease to be a statistic. So,
I mean, the Department of Veterans Affairs, the medical side of the house, and I know there's a lot of people out there that disagree with me, but I think that stuff is amazing. Amazing. Now, I know there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse that goes on, just like any large government organization. But I have a lot of friends that are walking around today because of the VA care they got. So I will never bad talk them. I know it's not perfect. Mm-hmm. But the point I'm making is all of our military that's accessible for every military veteran in America. And back to the emotional triggers that our first responders are exposed to, I feel that every time a firefighter walks out the front door and says goodbye to their spouse and their kids, every time a law enforcement officer puts on body armor and slings a gun, that to me is a combat deployment, meaning you may or may not get exposed to trauma. You may or may not get hurt or worse, but you're walking out that door to go deal with it. And the big difference in the veteran space is that was episodic, months at a time, and then you come home, and for the most part, you leave it over there. You guys don't have the ability to do that. So there's even more of a requirement for you than a lot of the military guys for something like the VA. Now, I've said that in the past, and I've been jumped on because, they have this, and that. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what any of that means. What I do know is that there is not a Department of Veterans Affairs for our first responders. And this thing that Representative Alvarez and his team have gotten approved in Florida and is now in 5 states is one valuable way. I think there's a lot of other ways to get after it and help, but this is one way to help our first responders. And I think we need to do everything we can to make sure it stays in place. And then more's added onto it. TMS, they call it eTMS, EEG guide TMS. That's great, but there's other stuff too. Anyway, a little bit of a soapbox moment there. Sorry.
No, but it's absolutely true. And this is what I've said. And it hurts us in so many ways. It hurts us statistically, because if you're taking, for example, the mental health conversation, we supposedly had only 74 line of duty deaths in America of firefighters in 2023.
That's it.
Yeah. But,
I mean, it's still bad, but
that's
nationwide.
That's completely wrong.
Not
because here's the thing. Firstly, I think that was suicides. I think I can't remember now. I'm blanking on the exact statistic, but I think it was either full line of duty deaths or suicides. But anyway, so that's the ones that qualify for line of duty deaths. It's the ones that reported. So we all know, for example, that suicides,
and they were active. They were active first responders.
Yeah, so they were
firefighters.
working. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can tell you right now, in the state of Florida, there's more than that, just in the one state, one of 50 states. So you have the underreporting of, whatever the thing is, and they've got to fit the criteria of being line of duty, meaning if you were on your second day off or something and you have a heart attack, it's not attributed to your job, even though, of course, your job contributed to that. But then, as you alluded to, now take the retirees. You have most of these firefighters that are going to transition out around their 50s. When does most disease manifest?
After that. I mean, the veteran suicide epidemic's not with active duty guys. I mean, it's still bad, but it's after
exactly
they get out.
So the statistic is such a woeful tip of the iceberg of what it is. So then people look at the numbers and go, oh, well, it's not that bad. There's 1 million firefighters and we only lost 74, and that's okay. But that's wrong.
Right.
And then, like you said, if you think about it, you don't have any skin in the game. If they walk out the door and that's it, you've washed your hands of them, where's the draw to make the fire service healthier? Whereas if you have a version of the VA where like, well, God, it's costing us a fortune. These firefighters are just wrecked when they come out. And Is
there any kind of medical plan that you're eligible for when you retire?
It's 1 year COBRA, which anyone gets when they leave a job, which is like, thousands a month for the premiums. And then after that, you're on your own. So you think about all the physical and mental health injuries that you've accumulated over 10, 20, 25 years.
Wow.
And then
I didn't
you just
realize
literally,
it was that bad.
Yeah, slam the door behind you. So the old, the generation that was kind of on when I first got hired 22 years ago, that was a tail end where they still had got health insurance, but my generation, nothing. So, and again, the whole point is to make people healthier. So if, I've always said this about the British NHS, if you have a tax-based healthcare system, your whole push
National
is
Health
to,
Service?
Yeah, NHS,
okay.
yeah. The whole push then is to make the nation healthy, so you don't use very much tax money. So that benefits the nation. Now, it's not the case now because privatization happened. They sliced and diced the NHS. And, now the Brits look like Americans almost. We have an obesity crisis that's crushing our medical system. But if you truly leave it as it is, as a tax-based healthcare system, then you want to make people healthy. Well, if we had a version of the VA, it doesn't have to be a national organization, but if departments or states were bound to take care of their first responders after they transition out, how would that shift the work week, fitness standards, the mental health conversation?
Yeah, even if it's just some help at the state level or federal level to help with the insurance premiums and that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would think there'd be something.
Yeah, not that I'm aware of. I mean, the pension is the carrot on the stick that's dangled in front of everyone.
What about it at the city level? Anything you've heard of with some cities being better than others?
Well, there is a handful of cities, I think, that still have managed to keep that, health insurance, but that's an anomaly in the fire service. So,
wow.
Yeah. So again, it's the same thing I've talked about. If we have a profit-based healthcare system, which we do, where's the resistance to obesity? There isn't. Companies are making trillions of dollars off, dying Americans. If you have the military-industrial complex that's making all this money when we go to war, where's the resistance to war? So, this is the issue. We've got such a broken system that there's nothing that incentivizes making our first responders healthy.
So much of it, I think, comes back to getting at them when they're kids. To help make things, whether we're talking obesity, behavioral health, or just the understanding of the value of sleep. I mean, when I grew up, I'll get all the sleep I need when I'm dead. Like when I went to Buds, that's what everybody said. We'll get all the sleep we need. And now, thanks to a lot of people working in that sleep science world, it's been helpful. It's been helpful.
Absolutely. So the people listening, if they want to access, I know Wave Neuro is the main organization that's providing it here. Where
eTMS is what it's called when it's run through the states.
Okay.
And there's a reason for that. Don't ask me. I don't know why. But eTMS, I think the website's eTMS Florida for those in Florida. And it's easy enough to find it if you live in Massachusetts, Virginia, Ohio, and Missouri. And again, I'm not affiliated in any way with these guys. I just firmly believe and know that it helps because it improves sleep. And if there's anything I learned when I was in that POTUF job at SOCOM, if you make sleep better, everything gets better. I had this inpatient program. It's called the PrEP program at James Haley VA Hospital. And it's inpatient, but you get to go home on the weekends type thing. And, we had the pain meds, had the PTSD, we had the orthopedic issues. And they take this whole holistic picture of you, and they do MRIs, they scan everything, they look at all this stuff. And over time, the vestibular issues get a little bit better. The vision issues get a little bit better. The sleep gets a little bit better. The headaches get a little bit better. The short-term memory, all these things start getting incrementally a little bit better. So when you show up to these programs, think of it as a plate overflowing with little problems, right? And if those problems are all shrink, then you can hold them on the plate. The most important thing on that plate that I learned in this program, thank you, Stephen Scott and the whole TBI crew there, and Doc Merritt and all of them, Doc Corey. The most important thing is sleep. Because when sleep gets better, and I'm talking recovery sleep, when recovery sleep improves, every single thing that you're dealing with gets better. And if it doesn't get better, your ability to deal with it gets better. And it's amazing, man. It's amazing. And my wife's the biggest fan of the PrEP program that there is, because I came back a different person, Yeah, I was one of those guys that kind of poo-pooed, I'm good, man. I don't need any of that weird stuff. But having gone through it now, I think I'm one of their biggest fans. I'm a huge proponent of what the VA is doing to help guys lead healthy, sustainable lives. And I worry about the first responder space. And, the stuff that, at least in the state of Florida, that they're talking about at the legislative level, I think it's great, because I think it is going to help a lot of people, but I think there's a lot more can be done.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what you were talking about with that program that you were part of, if you think of the Green Berets, the Thor 3 program, these are all completely enveloping, holistic programs to, get people back to work, get people on the battlefield, or, a healthy transition out if you have a career-ending injury. But whatever it is, you have these tools. And I think that's what we need. And we were talking at lunch today. What's really exciting is that, the work week is like I always call it, the herd of elephants in the room. And there hasn't been an expert on the show yet that hasn't said anything other than, if you are not addressing your sleep, then your nutrition, your fitness, all these other things that people harp on about is almost pointless. Yeah. So now you take care of that, or at least the ability to sleep, the rest and recovery, fully staffed department. Now your relationships are getting better, the shame and the guilt of not spending time with your kids, all those compounding elements. But then we shift to performance, because when you have strength and conditioning and sports psychologists and all these people in your community, you're trying to forge performance on the battlefield. When I have nutritionists and strength and conditionings in my community, they're just saying, let's try and get them to die less. So we're not even in the performance space. We're not even close to it. We're using the GPS that, your friend did to get home to find out what does performance even look like. So this is what's exciting, is the next phase is actual performance. So how can we look at, breath work, the cardiorespiratory fitness, all these things? Because like one of the most, mind-blowing things that I had a realization of is we have a finite amount of air on our back in an IDLH environment, in a fire, for example. yet we never talk about breath, and we don't have fitness standards in our community.
Interesting.
It's insanity.
Yeah.
For your world, if you weren't fit and you could basically be a couch potato and like, all right, now you've got to do your 1 mile underwater swim.
Yeah, good luck.
What are you going to do? Come up in the middle of, the Iraqi Sea and, oh dear, I got shot. No, it's unacceptable. So now forging performance, and using the same things that we talked about in the mental health tools to now be calm under pressure, to now, have the ability to get into a flow state in a primary search in a burning building. So I find it super exciting because, it's only going to get better and better and better. But the biggest hurdle was the work week and reversing this recruitment crisis. And I think, that boulder is moving now. So now behind that, we can put in fitness standards. We can put in addressing mental health at the front door, understanding.
And all that calming stuff, super important. Mm-hmm. Like the yoga and the breath work. Like I used to make fun of that stuff. And then when I was in the prep program, they teach you how to get your heart rate variability, how to change it, like a live feed on a screen, and learning how to increase your HRV. I mean, it's amazing. Yeah. And with that, with the breath work and yoga and all that stuff, meditation, mindfulness, whatever you want to call it, it actually works. They have these objective tools, and you can see it in front of you working with all your sensors on and stuff. So all that stuff really valuable. But I agree with you, man. You get that going to a 24/72, and a lot of other things are going to get better, just like when you improve the sleep.
100%. One story you told me over lunch, and I want to make sure that we talk about this, firstly, because I think this sadly is part of this whole conversation where we do have issues in our reproductive ability, whether it's sterility, whether it's stillbirths, whether it's autism and Down syndrome in our children, passing on pediatric cancers. When you break down a human being and then on top of that expose us to carcinogens, there's that multi-generational physiological issue too. You were talking about a story with a young boy with autism, and again, this the eTMS. So talk to me about what you witnessed in the world of autism with this treatment.
So again, I am in no way, shape, or form an expert on autistic stuff. But when we were first exposed about 11 years ago to what these guys were doing with this intrinsic alpha wave, this type of TMS, some of us from SOCOM traveled out to Newport Beach to see these guys. And I remember the command surgeon was with us, Captain Scott Coda. He's actually now he's the medical officer in Biloxi, Mississippi, for the VA hospital.
Okay.
He's continuing to serve in a cool way. But anyway, there were a couple of us, and so we're sitting in the waiting room of this place, and it's in the corner. There's a bunch of kids, and there's some parents, mostly moms. And one of them comes over to us because we're kind of out of place, through military guys. And she's like, "Hey, how you guys doing? What are you doing here?" And I'm like, "Oh, we're here to learn and have we're going to listen to a presentation and see what it is that's going on here. Why are you here?" And she goes, "Oh, well, little Johnny, our kid has or had." She used the word had autism. And I was like, "Really?" And she showed a video, and the kid's playing over in the corner. I wasn't even paying attention. There's a couple of kids over there. And she shows this video of a kid. I don't know what it's called, but when you see a kid walking and the elbows are pinned and the wrists are kind of bent and the knees are sort of pinned and they can't, there's a name for it. I don't know what it's called. I know
when it's a head injury, we call it decorticate, but yeah, that kind of flexing of everything.
Kind of flex, yeah. And so turns out they, and you could tell just looking at her, she was well off. They were not hurting for money. She said, we've tried everything for little Johnny. I'm just saying little Johnny. I can't remember the guy's name. But we've tried everything with little Johnny. And we've tried all the insurance stuff. We've tried all the cash pay stuff. This was like kind of a last-ditch effort for us. And I said, "Well, how's it going?" She goes, "I don't know. You tell me." And she calls him over, and he comes jogging over. And she's like, show this man what you're working on. Okay, so James, elbows out, wrists relaxed, knees, just looked like a kid playing. And he was working on this thing where his thumb and his pointer finger, his thumb and his middle finger, and he couldn't quite get it to the ring finger or the pinky finger. And she said, yeah, that's where he is now. And I said, oh my God, how long have you been here? And she said, well, this is our 3rd week. And then the kid said a few things, and then he walked away. And she said, oh, and the other thing I didn't mention is he was nonverbal. Okay, so we're just sitting there. We're the 3 SOCOM guys. We're just sitting there going, what the hell did we just walk into? And then we went in, and we took the brief and the presentation, and I just kind of sat there with my jaw open. But we had a PhD guy and a physician, and they were just asking a ton of questions. Then we went back to SOCOM, told General Votel about it, because part of the presentation they gave us was what the benefits they were seeing in the veteran space as well, primarily with sleep, but a lot of stuff with anxiety and those kind of things. And to General Joe Votel's credit, he said, hey, let's work with the pros up in Bethesda and the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences. Let's get a study going. Let's see if we can bring this out to be more available to our force. And that's what we did. And, 2 years later, I retired and went to work at Kaatsu, and I kind of lost track of it. But now I see, it's just so good to see that now after all the, the evidence-based studies and all the stuff, it's just good to see that it's now being used as a force of good. They're still treating autistic kids, but what's happening with the program now is all about veterans, first responders. And it kind of blew me away. There's other stories I could bore you with on this stuff, but I
think it's so important to hear, though. I had oh my goodness, Charlotte Paige Figge. So Charlotte Figge, if you ever heard Charlotte's Web as reference to CBD, Paige was Charlotte's mum. And Charlotte was born, she was a twin, and she was born with this issue. I think she was nonverbal as well, but when she was infant/toddler, she was basically dying. And they'd thrown all the things at her, all the, the latest, greatest drugs that were being studied, and all these things, and nothing was working. And she had kind of found her way into the literature of CBD, and that was, very, very early. And she got this one company to kind of put together this CBD mixture, and they put it in her feeding tube. And she was literally in palliative care at this point. They were just waiting for her to die. And she did a complete 180.
Really?
But again, who would have thought? Modern medicine said, well, if it's, this clinical trial and these drugs are the best, and if it doesn't work, then, shoulder shrug. And who'd have thought that a magnet by the head or part of the hemp plant would actually be the thing that would save a child or turn a child's, ability around. So, it's so powerful to hear these stories, because the film, the show that I was telling you about that I'm going to make, one of the parts of the other part, which will be the documentary part, is just going to showcase, amongst other things, all of these different treatments. So the person watching isn't told, well, this is the thing, because if the thing doesn't work for you, well, then where's the hope? You're like, well, I'm broken then. Or my child's broken and we're never going to be able to fix it. But when you're exposed to all these different things, maybe eTMS, maybe CBD, whatever the thing is on that particular example, maybe that's the missing link. Maybe that's the piece that you didn't realize was there. So whether it's a first responder or a veteran and their mental health, or, hopefully healing from a TBI, whether it's an autistic child, what a beautiful story to hear. So I think it's important for people listening. I know there's a lot of first responders out there that do have children with autism. So,
yeah. Well, thanks for bringing that up. Yeah, I just, if we could do nothing else, and I'm just thinking in my current role at the Florida Chamber, if we did nothing else other than getting kids moving and sleeping better, you're making, we'd be making huge leaps and bounds improvements in the future workforce and, quality of life and all that kind of stuff. I will say it's a little overwhelming, this director of the health council, because there's so much that falls under the term health. Mm-hmm. And my approach to it so far has been, hey, let's prioritize what we want to do as a team, and let's get after one or two really, really valuable things. And I think movement and sleep for the youth is hugely important. I think helping in the veteran first responder space, whether it's sleep or otherwise, is hugely important. Even if it's just sharing current resources that are out there. There's so much good stuff out there. It's just hard to navigate through some of it. So maybe one of the things we'll do is help people navigate through that space. Have you heard of that 988, versus 911 to 988?
Yeah, the suicide number. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't really know anything about it. I went out to lunch with somebody the other day, and I parked, and there's a placard right in front of me, 988. And I was like, huh. So I dialed it. Just curious, There's like, oh, this will be part of the workday. And I dialed it, and you go through this quick phone tree. Are you a veteran or no? Yeah, I'm a veteran. Dude, in 20 seconds, I had a live person, a veteran, speaking with me on the phone, asking what service I was. And if he wasn't the right guy, they'd find somebody. I was like, hey, man, I'm good. This is non-emergency. I was just testing it out. I work at the Florida Chamber of Commerce. And he wasn't even in the state. He was in another state. But
really?
that program, I haven't tested it if you're a non-veteran, mm-hmm. but I was pretty impressed, man. It's pretty cool. And they have resources at the ready to drive you in towards via the phone calls.
That's good to hear. I've never had anyone talk about actually dialing.
I didn't even know what it was.
Yeah.
I guess it used to be a different number, and they changed it to kind of have a rebranding, a nationwide rebranding of it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty cool stuff.
Well, one more thing before we close out. You just kind of reminded me, if you're talking about a statewide initiative to make a huge difference in our children's health, did you ever see that show Jamie Oliver, the British chef, trying to overhaul what we serve in our schools?
I definitely know who Jamie Oliver. I've definitely seen some of his stuff, but I don't know the status of the overhaul of the food in the schools and all that. How did it go?
So I gotta follow up, because I know it was initially in the UK. Mm-hmm. And at least initially it was a success, because I think, again, we're talking about false economy, and we were talking earlier, a lot of the way we don't need more taxpayers' money. We need to, be proactive. And so, for example, you want to free up money in the US to address the obesity crisis. There's trillions of dollars available there. And then, maybe stop starting wars all over the place is another one. But
you're so subtle.
But from what I understand, there was also, it was cost effective, because, real food was served in schools for the longest time, till these big corporations kind of muscled their way in. And all of a sudden now we're serving processed food, and these shiny, Cisco trucks roll into every school that I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. So that's a monopoly basically on our school food. So it would be interesting, because I know he did it here in America, had success. The kids loved the food. The people, working in the dining hall after, again, the jarring transition, started to enjoy it, because they weren't just serving slop. They were actually creative. And it was a success in this American school. But then shortly after, people dismantled it, and I don't know why. But that'd be another conversation, is, if we really want to
contact with,
I don't. Yeah. Someone I want to get on the show, but he's
tough to get.
Yeah, well known in the UK. So, but I'll see if I can, my sister does a lot of work with the BBC, so maybe there's a possibility to get hold of someone there. But I think that would be phenomenal, because that's the next conversation. Yeah. Because a lot of these kids, if they're in certain demographics, aren't even exposed to what food is, where it's grown, what it looks like, how to cook.
I mean,
So
one
putting
of the things,
that back in.
one of the things the Chamber's really good at in Florida is if a pilot program like is used as a proof of concept and it's successful and it's backed up by data, the Chamber's really good at getting that information to the right people so that maybe not bringing in more money, but reallocating of resources towards something that's been proven or is being shown through a pilot program to be very, very effective. Something like that could definitely fall in that category. That could be pretty cool. Maybe if somebody's listening, they'll reach out.
Absolutely. Well, I think this is what, we talked about the Venn diagram. I've had over 1,100 episodes now. And so
congratulations, man. That's amazing.
Thank you. So where that overlap is the truth, in all these conversations. All these people of all walks of life, even different countries, and they're all saying some things the same, that's where we know, there's a real true north there. And it seems like a lot of the problems that we have, you don't need to innovate. You need to actually dismantle and go back to how we moved 100 years ago, how we ate 100 years ago, how we communed 100 years ago. Yeah. So it's not hacks and all this stuff and latest innovation and more money. It's like the reverse. And I think this is the thing with the schools. If you went back to serving real food, if you went back to recesses and PE programs and things that were an integral part of our education, 50 years ago, you would reverse a lot of these issues. The schools and states that are brave enough to say no phones in schools, that just takes guts. It's just, if you implement it, you implement it. So
movement,
I think,
food, sleep,
connection,
social connectedness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, there's not a big price tag on any of those. It's really, like you said, it's a reallocation of funds, and the same in the fire service.
I like what you said. It's deconstructing some things.
Yeah.
Yeah, which turns into a unique fight sometimes if you're talking about pharmaceutical or big food.
Exactly. But that's the problem. We're talking about the nation's health. What's more important, their profit margin or our children's health? So, like we said earlier, when you put the company ahead of your own family, then there's a disconnection. Yeah. So, all right. Well, before we wrap up, is there anything else that you want to discuss?
What were we just talking about with Palm Beach County? Because we were just down there last week.
Yeah, well, they have just announced that
they're one of the 2472?
Yeah, so they officially
is that county-wide?
Yes, all the fire service. Yeah, fire and EMS.
We were just down there with Healthcare District, Palm Beach County, and I think all the public school nurses there are employees of HCD Palm Beach County. And they're doing some pretty innovative stuff. We went to one of their clinics, and it's whole person health or integrative health, integrative medicine. So you could go for dental and 15 minutes later be getting a mammogram and then have a counselor talking with you and get go to their food pharmacy to have some good, clean, wholesome food if you're a type 2 diabetic. Like, they have all of this stuff in one location. It's very, very cool and innovative for the state of Florida. So anyway, kind of shout out, I guess, to Palm Beach County and the Healthcare District, Palm Beach County, for all they're doing down there. And now to hear that the fire service in that county is going to a 24/72. I just think that is so important and valuable for the behavioral health and emotional wellness of our first responders and their families. It's so cool to hear. And I think a lot of that comes from the platform that you have created with this. And I think that I'm just really appreciative of it and grateful for you doing all this, man. Appreciate you letting me be on.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, like I said, the feeling is mutual. I always tell people this podcast would be nothing. It would be an Englishman just yapping on his own on the microphone if it wasn't for all the guests. So, this is an accumulation of all this knowledge and all these, stories. And so I want to thank you as well. I mean, every single person that comes on adds another layer to someone to have the hope of making their life a little bit better, and then the tools, the ability. And this conversation, with all the things you've talked about, including eTMS, it's invaluable. So I want to thank you so much, not only from driving all the way from Tampa to here in Ocala, but also for being so generous with your time and coming on the Behind the Shield podcast.
Thank you. And we must be done because my coffee is empty and Ember just woke up. Your beautiful golden retriever. So I guess we're done. Not golden retriever. You're a German Shepherd. Sorry, I'm thinking of my dog, Bug. Thanks, brother.